This is the first time I've met. Hi, MT. It's nice meeting you in person. Yeah. How many videos do you put out a week? Like 5? About 7 stabs at the Easter egg. You're just going for like as many as you possibly can, as opposed to just like one good guess, like just throwing it out there. Sorry.
No, it's so funny that you bring this up, and I didn't realize that he's like the Indiana Jones of the...
He is, correct. He's like the Indiana Jones that got run over by the thing.
Well, James, thank you so much for coming out today.
Sure.
This is Hasbro's first big convention. It's a big family convention, and we're so happy to have you here because, you're so entwined with the Marvel Cinematic Universe and the Marvel family in general because you've done what you've been doing your entire adult career. In fact, the first time I was aware of you was somewhere in the early 90s. Someone had given me a tape of Tromeo and Juliet.
Yeah.
And if you guys don't know Troma Films, they are, I think
there's 8 people out there.
Yeah. Help me if I'm getting this wrong, but they're like the modern day Roger Corman.
Yeah. Troma Studios is the oldest, I would say B-movie company, but Z-movie company in the world. And I actually got hired while I was still in grad school at Columbia University to write a screenplay for my first film, which was Tromeo and Juliet. I got paid $150 to write the screenplay. But the movie ended up, although it's a very small movie, we made it for $350,000. It ended up playing a year, midnight shows in Los Angeles. It was very successful for what it was. And I didn't really plan on going into the film business before that. I really was kind of sucked into it, and that's where my career started.
Was that, and I know that, I've read a great deal in doing research for this conversation, and I know that you made some 8mm films with your family back home, but you were, at that time, I think you were pretty committed to a band, right?
Well, no, I started making 8mm films when I was about 12 years old. The first one I made, I saw Night of the Living Dead by the great, late George Romero, and I said, oh my God, I saw that, and then Friday the 13th, and I was like, God, I can make movies because they weren't like expensive productions. Until then, I think I had only seen bigger Hollywood films. And so I started making 8mm films, and the first one was to have my one brother tear apart and eat my other brother. That was the entirety of the plot. And he was a zombie, and I made him like dark. I took my mom's mascara and put it around his eyes, and I took some Karo syrup and red food dye to make blood and spilled it all over my other brother. And then he ate tissue paper, and he made him eat tissue paper. And so it was part filmmaking and part just being sadistic to my little brother. John, who plays Kraken in Guardians of the Galaxy.
So after Tromeo and Juliet, that's kind of how you got into filmmaking.
I was just like, I did everything growing up. I think I was just a creative person who liked storytelling. I drew comic books and comic strips. I did filmmaking. I did photography. I did, acting, and I wrote plays, and then really played in a band professionally for a couple years. So I started out really wanting to be a musician, but I honestly wasn't good enough to do that. And then I just sort of went to grad school and fell into filmmaking in 1995 is when we made Tromeo and Juliet.
So, as you're getting into filmmaking, was Tromeo and Juliet the first time you really felt creative and are able to express your creativity in that medium?
No, I think that I came to, I used to play in bands, and I obviously that's a lot of creativity going on, but I think when I started writing, I still remember I took a creative writing class at St. Louis University undergrad, and we had to write a play, and I was just taking the class to see what it was like, and I stayed up for like 2 nights writing this play that I thought was, just so fun to do. And I went in and we gave it to the class, and then we had different people in the class read different parts of the play. And as they were reading this play, people were laughing and they were enjoying the play. And I feel like that was when I went, a light went off in me, and I said, I think I'm good at this. I think this is something that I do well. And it was like after playing in bands for so many years, it felt like I was being, I felt like I was being acknowledged for my brain as opposed to just something else. And it was a really good feeling, and I think I was sort of hooked since that moment, which led to film.
That's interesting. So, what was that play about?
It was about a guy that was sleeping with all these women. 8 hot women. And, yeah.
It's great. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, we're going to we'll have the toys next year here.
Well, it's funny because that actually sounds not too dissimilar to what you wrote when you wrote The Toy Collector.
Well, Toy Collector is a little different. Toy Collector was a novel that I wrote in grad school. Toy Collector is about a guy who sells drugs to keep his toy collection habit going. And he loves collecting toys. And I actually had a huge collection of old robot toys at the time and was kind of into these things. I get into these things really crazy, and then I just, 2 years later, I go, what was I thinking about? And I put everything in a closet and I forget about it.
So do you remember what those toys were specifically?
Well, it was a lot of old, like, 60s, space robot toys. So it was
like Bobby the Robot and
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Robot from Lost in Space.
That and then just every kind of robot I could find. Yeah,
great. Well, so when you developed Guardians of the Galaxy with the Marvel team, what was that process like for you to come on board Marvel? And was there a meeting that you were pitching that story? Was there a previous draft of that had been written?
There was a previous draft that was there when I came in, and then there was a couple of rewrites, a couple of drafts by different writers after that. But it didn't have the stuff that people think of as the basic Guardians things. It didn't have the Walkman or the music. There was no comedy in it or humor. Rocket was just he wasn't the sort of sad little Frankenstein character he is in the movies. So that stuff all came later after I came in.
Okay. So when you're developing a script, is that something, we talked about this for just a second, this fascinates me because I love to write, and I've written absolutely nothing that anybody's ever looked at. But from a process standpoint, you were saying earlier that you spend a great deal of time developing the outline, and then once that's done, it very quickly becomes a script.
Well, I wouldn't call it an outline, I call it a treatment. The outline actually comes first, and I'm sitting on my microphone, which fell out of my butt. Not actually in my butt. I start with an outline, which is just like beating out the 3 acts and what the main things are, and what happens to characters, what's the theme, what do they learn. But then I fall into the treatment stage of writing the screenplay, and to me, that's the most important part of writing a screenplay. So my treatments, most people's treatments are like 25 pages long, 20 pages long, maybe 15 pages long. My treatments end up being like 70 pages long. And then,
just for context, a typical script is about 120.
A typical script is, for me, I like, it depends on what the movie is. Yeah, like Guardians 2 is like, it is what the length is. It's about 120 pages, 124 pages. Guardians 1 was probably closer to 105 pages, closer to what the length of the script was. But the treatment, it beats out, it has every single scene that's in the movie. It has a lot of the dialogue that's in the movie. It's just that it's written in prose form, and I can go in and change it all really easily without having to worry about changing scenes and things like that. I can shift things around. And it really is, like, to me, the spine, it's like when you're writing a screenplay, you're building a body. And the most important part of the body, well, one of the most important parts, they're all pretty important because you die without a lot of them, but is the skeleton, where you really have to build the skeleton and the musculature. So my treatments are generally 70 pages plus about 20 pages of photographs that I intersperse because I give a lot of references for what I want things to look like, or I even draw spaceships and things that I put in there so that I know what people, can visualize what things are like, because for me, film is, a medium composed of visuals and sound, not of words. It's not a novel. A novel is words that you look at and process in that way, but with a movie, you're really building a picture that's moving and sound, and so to be able to see things in that way more clearly while I'm writing it, that helps me a lot. And in fact, then from that stage, then I write the screenplay, but simultaneous to writing the screenplay, I also do the storyboarding. Because, for instance, like if you saw Guardians Volume 2, the big fight between Nebula and Gamora, I didn't write that first. I drew every single shot of that storyboard, which is almost exactly what's in the movie, because again, it's primarily a visual thing, and sometimes we start to get too hung up on words when we're making movies, and so I want to keep it a visual thing, and that's what came first. And then I took those pictures and I wrote the screenplay based around those storyboards.
So when you're making a movie, you know, we're all very familiar with the very famous line from Empire Strikes Back, where Leo looks at Han and she says, "I love you," and he turns back to her and he says, "I know."
Yeah.
And everybody knows that's a wild line. That's one that Harrison just improvised on set at the time. You work with some incredibly talented, gifted actors who are also very funny. You know, the whole cast, I mean, they're all incredible. How much is improvisation used or not used when you're developing?
It's less than 1% for sure.
Oh, it is.
For sure, 99% of every line in both Guardians movies, especially the second one, was in the screenplay. Occasionally Chris will come up with something, but usually even with Chris coming up with something, it's something that we come up with, that we talk about beforehand, and then I write into the screenplay. For instance, in the first movie, the whole Kevin Bacon conversation, you know, is something that Chris and I talked about beforehand. He said, "I bet he's really into Footloose." And I said, "Yeah, I bet he thinks like he's mixed up everything. So he thinks Kevin Bacon is like a hero. He doesn't know that Kevin Bacon is somebody different than the character's name." Yeah, because one of the things with Peter Quill is his memory is terrible and great at the same time. So he remembers pop culture particulars, but he doesn't quite remember the context of things, and his whole entire history on Earth has become a sort of amalgamation of truth and reality and fantasy. But that thing was something that Chris and I talked about beforehand, and then I wrote into the screenplay, and it was a part of the screenplay. Same thing on the first movie. I remember when Dave Bautista goes, "I am not a princess." That was something that was improv in a rehearsal, and then I wrote it into the screenplay. That happens occasionally, but it rarely happens on set. Occasionally it'll happen on set, but rarely.
So, you know, I work on the consumer product side, and you, both times you've made both of these films, have given us incredible gifts, because when you have these scenes where, you know, the Guardians at the very beginning of the movie are kind of put together for the first time, and they all have, you know, their prison jumpsuits, and then they, at the end of the movie, have to wear their, you know, Ravager suits. That's like solid gold to filmmakers,
right?
To toy makers, I should say.
Yeah.
Because you're giving us all these opportunities to make different versions of these characters. And of course, you give them these incredible accessories like, you know, Peter Quill's blasters and his boot rockets. I guess my question is that like a conscious decision from your perspective of not making stuff to make toys with, but like, how do those components get developed into the film?
Well, I think of it in a different way. And like, when I was doing the first Guardians, I was talking with Kevin Feige, who's the head of Marvel, about the toys. And I said, "Can I meet with the toy guys?" And he's like, why would the director want to meet with the toy guys? He's like, "Because I want to talk about all the great toys that I think we can make from the movie." And it's not a matter of like, oh, we can make more money, because honest to God, I make all my money off of directing and off of, you know, theatrical and DVD sales and things like that. I don't make money off of toys. But as a kid, you know, I loved movies coming out, TV shows coming out, and having the Black Hole figures or the Star Wars figures, or the, you know, being a part of the universe in that way was something I enjoyed a lot as a kid. So I think I always just liked the idea of making a movie that had these toys growing out of it, and in the same way all of the, you know, other extended stuff comes out of it, that people can be a part of it and make up their own stories with these characters and play with these characters and feel more of a deep connection to them that I feel through writing. So I'm always interested in the toy stuff, and I do. I consciously think of, this would be a fun spaceship to play with.
So you've given me so many follow-up questions right now. The first one, and I've been meaning to, I thought about this since I first saw Peter Quill's blaster design. Was that in any way kind of homage to the Black Hole?
It wasn't. I didn't know.
No, it wasn't.
I forgot about the Black Hole gun until after the movie came out. Somebody said, "You copied the Black Hole gun." I said, "I guess I have."
And then the next one is, you know, you talk a little bit about kind of collaborating on your toys together as a kid. Do you remember what your favorite toys were as a kid? Did you have a specific line that was your favorite?
Well, you know, I was a big fan of Rom Space Knight, which I've written a lot about. I was a big fan of the comic book. Listen, you know, as a
He was
child...
here yesterday, by the way. There was a guy dressed up as Rom.
As Rom?
I hope he's here today because not only was he dressed up, he had a voice changer. So, like, you know, he would talk. He was like, "Thank you, human." It was awesome.
Yeah. You know, listen, I liked toys. I liked any sort of little figurines that I could play with and make up stories. And I feel blessed often because I go into my office every day now while I'm writing, and it is that same thing that I did as a kid with my brothers, you know, going and playing with toys and making up stories. And I remember, you know, I still have specific memories of, I remember once playing with an Oscar the Grouch and then, like, you know, all these little characters that were like a mix of science fiction and Oscar the Grouch and all this stuff, and this big journey that we had these characters go on when I must have been 8 years old or something, 7 years old. And I still remember that day in my basement with my brothers playing that, you know, telling that elaborate story. And that's exactly what I do with Guardians, and that's why it's so exciting to me. It's so fun to me to be able to tell these stories because it is just an extension of the gift of play and creativity. And that's the same with toys as it is with writing. It's just, you have to, when you're playing, you don't have to worry about logic, you know. Nobody's going to, call you out on plot holes or this or that.
Yeah.
You know, so when you're making a movie, the logic, the puzzle side of the brain is also very important for me. It's fitting these things together so that they make logical sense. And I've always been a guy that's like logic. I like puzzles. I like math. And both of those, you know, I think oftentimes people think there's logic people and creative people. But for me, those are the two things, you know, I enjoy the most. So fitting those together and writing a screenplay and making a movie works well.
Did you ever make your own toys when you were a kid? Was there ever like, I asked that question because I remember I grew up in Michigan and Battle of the Planets was a TV show that I loved. It was a Japanese show. There were no toys for Battle of the Planets. I found out later in my life there were. They just never made it to Michigan. And I ended up building my own spaceship, the Phoenix, out of balsa wood, and I painted it. And that was like the first time I was like, oh, I can do this myself. And that was very freeing. And I just wonder, and I also played the same way that you did, and I think many people did. You know, they're introduced to these characters through narrative, through story, and then they have the characters. They bring them home, and they put up a fort in the living room out of pillows, and their GI Joes mixed with their Star Wars mixed with Cookie Monster, and all hell breaks loose. So I was just curious if you ever made your own toys.
I don't think I did ever make that. But that I remember. I mean, I'm sure we made stuff all the time and, you know, made statues and paper mache things and all that, but I don't think I remember ever making my own toys.
What were your favorite, I know you mentioned Ron, and I know you mentioned that you created your own comics as a kid. I'm just curious what those comics were about, and also what were your favorite comics as a kid?
Well, I was a huge Marvel Comics fan. I mean, I read all Marvel and DC comics, but I was a huge Spider-Man fan, and I had, as a kid, my dad met this kid and he bought his comic book collection, so I had every Avengers from number 4 through number 300. I had every Fantastic Four starting at number 4. I had every Amazing Spider-Man starting at number 2. So I had all these comic books, which I sold and moved to California. But I read everything. I read all of those comics growing up again and again, and it really influenced who I am today. So those are my favorite comics. The comics I drew were basically trying to figure out new superheroes that were always rip-offs of whatever superhero I was reading. You know. Because so many superheroes in the comics are rip-offs of other superheroes anyway. Like everybody has their fast guy, and everybody has their Batman type, and everybody has their. And so,
my favorite right now is Red Tool.
Red Tool.
It's a DC character who looks exactly like Deadpool, who kills people with tools. His name is Red Tool. If you could go back and talk to your 22-year-old self, or yourself as you were just getting started in filmmaking with Troma, what advice would you give to yourself on being able to adapt your creativity and your passion into your work?
You know, I was pretty. I think I had a great. when I was young, and I was working at Trauma, I had a really powerful, I guess you can call it a spiritual awakening, for lack of a better term. And I was very frustrated. And this was after I had done Romeo and Juliet, because I had done so many, I kept writing a screenplay, and then it didn't work out, and I judged it, and I went and I wrote half of a book, and I didn't like it, and I'm like, I worked really hard from a young age, and to the detriment of my life in some ways, because I started working very, very hard when I was 18 or so, and became obsessed with being successful, and didn't have the regular life that other people have, going to school and things like that, because I was so obsessive about creating and about success, frankly. But I kept, starting something, it didn't work out, I did something else, and I was becoming very frustrated. And one night, this like a bolt of lightning, it went through my head, which is finish what you start. And it was not, I had been given all the tools I had to be successful. I just was always balking. I would start something and then not complete it. And the truth is, to become successful, you need to just complete projects. And the first one will probably suck. And the second one will suck, but it will suck a little less. And the third one will suck a little less than that. And it really was about just completing the things that I set in front of me and taking them all the way. And once they were done, moving on to the next thing, instead of trying to find that big idea that would make me super successful in no time without the work. And I had that awakening. I went home, and I was writing a book for Lloyd Kaufman at the time, and I finished that book, and I then went and wrote a screenplay called The Specials, which became a movie that was not very successful, but the screenplay itself is what got me every single bit of work in Hollywood that I have to this day. It's what started everything. And so that advice, that moment of clarity, really allowed me to go on. And I'll have to add one more thing to that, because I think the other thing I realized in that moment was that what I do is not about me. I can sit here and I can try to be successful all I want for my own sake because I'm scared, But the truth is I believe that we are here in this world as a service to other people, to support each other and to love each other. And if I am going to create and tell stories, those stories need to be to the service of the people and what I think of as a deeper meaning to life that we can, survive. And so at that point, I think my whole awareness shifted in the way I approached my career and the way I approached story, that it just wasn't about me, it was about you and it was about us. And I think from that moment on, my life really changed, which was a great gift.
That's great, that's very powerful. There's a great video that I've seen several times online called Finish Not Perfect, which, I know a lot of people that are writers or artisans and I think to your point, what this video kind of sums up is that, get the project done. It's not going to be perfect, but having it completed gets you to the next thing, and that evolution of getting from project to project will one day elevate what you're doing to a level where you kind of idealize where you want to be.
Yeah, people always, they ask for advice so much, and to me it's really just finish what you start. Just do it. Then people are always like, how do you get an agent? And it's like, you write a great screenplay. It's a weird thing to say, but that is true. Yeah. If you write a great screenplay and you give it to everybody, it'll get found, because the thing about screenplays is there aren't many great ones. There really aren't. And if people start reading something that's great, they give it to somebody else, and somebody else, and then somebody else. Yeah. And it's things are kind of simple in a certain respect, but they're also very difficult and very challenging. And this industry becomes more and more difficult, simply because when I moved to Hollywood in 1998, the major studios would make 35 movies a year, and now they make 4. So that makes directing, being a film director especially, an incredibly hard occupation. And one I wouldn't recommend to people in general unless somebody had a really deep need to direct movies. I would say direct something else.
I have one more question for you, then I think we're going to open up the floor for some Q&A. Understanding the landscape in today's market for filmmaking and content development, I should say. Even though the major studios are only making 4 movies a year, there are more content providers out there. You've got streaming services and multiple different online venues where I think that if you were determined to be a storyteller, maybe not a movie maker, but a storyteller, that could be an option for someone wanting to get into it.
Totally. I think that's like, I don't see a difference. For me, I'm not one of those cinephile guys that likes only movies. I love TV, I love movies, I love comic books, I love books. I never really cared what way I told a story, just as long as I could tell that story. That's what I enjoy, is storytelling, and it doesn't really matter the format so much to me.
Yeah, as long as it's just a good idea.
As long as it's fun and it moves people and it touches people in some ways. And for me, making a movie, if somebody can walk out of the theater loving the person next to them a little more than they loved them when they walked into the theater, then that's really that's the thing I can hear.
Right. Thank you, James. I think we're going to open up.
He can ask.
What's up, buddy?
Hey, man.
So, what are the chances of us seeing Vance Astro in Guardians 3, who is like the leader of the original Guardians? Because we did get the original Guardians in Guardians 2. So, like, what are the chances of Vance Astro? Or is he technically Fox because he's a mutant?
He's not Fox.
So he's Marvel.
He's Marvel. They're not great.
Really on the
Aren't great. I'm done with the treatment. Not the greatest. I mean, there's so many characters I love, and Vance Astro is one of them in the Marvel Cosmic Universe. And one of the things I'm doing with Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 is trying to create a bed of seeds that will then grow into the entire Marvel Cosmic Universe that will be something that will drive the storytelling for the next 10 years of Marvel Cosmic Films and a lot of Marvel films in general. It is the last movie for this iteration of the Guardians of the Galaxy. The characters and the stories and the people we meet are going to go on and grow. And so all those types of characters that I love, like Vance Astro, I would love to see them at some point, but we may not see them in Volume 3. Because as you know, I'm not the guy that, I do not want to see, I don't think every superhero movie has to have 1 billion characters in it. I need to have every character have a full story that goes from start to finish. It's why I originally had Adam Warlock in Guardians 2, but it was one character too many. And so I decided to save it. So yeah, there won't be that many more characters in Volume 3 than Volume 2, but some of them are going to be different than what were in Volume 2.
Great question.
Hello, Mr. Gunn.
Hi.
I have 2 questions, one rhetorical and one actual. Rhetorical, why do you have to make, with especially your last 2 movies that make grown men cry? Myself included. I'm just Kevin Smith, by the way, let me tell you.
It makes me cry every time I see it. Like, I'll be honest, like, every single time I watch Guardians 1 and I see Drax, Pet Rocket, I get woo. And every single time I watch Guardians 2 and I see the stuff with Yondu at the funeral, all the stuff at the end, I start to get weepy. So it still affects me, even though I'm the one that wrote it.
Well, I know that after the first movie I went for all the Groot toys and now I'm going for all the Yondu, so I'm sure a lot like many people here.
Yes, yeah.
My actual question is, so following the 3rd movie, what do you hope your relationship with Marvel will be? Will you be some sort of shepherd? Because obviously, originally they talked about Joss Whedon being that, and I personally think your movies, to Joss Whedon's credit, I loved his Avengers movies, but I thought yours had more heart. And do you see yourself being some sort of godfather or beyond directing, being some sort of creative supervisor in the future?
Is shepherd an official title?
I like, right now I am shepherding the future of the Marvel Cosmic Universe. Like, that's one of the things that I'm doing.
I think that's worth
That's part of That's part of what Volume 3 is, and then off of Volume 3, I'm creating what are going to be the movies around that. how far that will extend for me in my journey beyond this present time over the next couple of years and making Guardians Volume 3, but also seeing those other films and dealing with Kevin a lot and talking about what I think should be, which characters should be spun off, etc. Is a big part of what I'm doing. And how long I'll keep doing that, I don't know. I go from project to project, and right now I am doing Volume 3, and then I've got a TV show, Starsky and Hutch, that I'm working on, and that's my life. I'm not a guy. A lot of directors you see, they get some success, and then they become attached to a billion different things, and I need to really love and give care to a few things, as opposed to many things to just spread myself thin.
Thank you for what you do.
Thank you.
Hi, what's your name and what's your question?
My name's Cody. I
Cody.
recently graduated from college, and I'm a concept artist. And I'm wondering how closely you work with the art department at Marvel Studios, and like how much back and forth there is before you come down to like a particular design on Star-Lord's helmet or something.
I work incredibly, Andy Park was the head of, Charlie Wynn was the head of our Viz Dev department on the first movie. Andy Park was the head of our Viz Dev department on the second film, and I've worked with them nearly every day, defining what the characters look like, what Groot looks like, In the first movie, I was like, no, I don't think he should have a nose. I don't think he should have a nose. And then on, Baby Groot, I drew the face and was like, this is what he looks like. He looks like a little emoji. And so I work very in depth with those guys, as well as with the other departments. Our production department usually is the ones who design most of the spaceships, and a lot of the costumes are designed by our costume designers. So there's a lot of visual development work that is a part of what the Guardians movies is, because all of that needs to work together as one unique vision. And the looks of Guardians 1 and Volume 2 are different, and Volume 3 will again be different, because I have a specific way of approaching each movie to make it stand apart from the rest. Sure.
Thank you. Hi, what's your name? What's your question?
I'm Joel, and my question is, will Adam Warlock appear in Volume 3?
Really on the nose there. I think this is your answer. I think this
You'll have to wait and see, but I wouldn't, don't rule it out.
Hi, what's your name and what's your question?
My name is Dorsey.
Hi, Dorsey.
First, thank you for giving us the awesome team that is the Guardians of the Galaxy
Oh, you're welcome.
on the screen. And as you can probably tell, I'm a really big Rocket fan.
Me too.
Yes.
Agreed.
So my question is, are we going to see Half-World in Guardians 3, and is it going to be the Half-World of the 80s, which is a little trippy, or is it going to be the Half-World of later on, which in its own way is even trippier?
Well, I mean, it's as you know, the MCU is one way of processing these characters, and 616 is a different one. So we're going to learn more about where Rocket is from in the coming sagas, and it may be a little bit different than in the comics, but we already know a lot about where he came from. It's a little bit more horrible than what's in the comic books when you come down to it. So we'll learn more about that in the near future.
Let me just jump in here for a quick. Is that how much of a challenge is that for you? Because the Guardians have had, to my recollection, publishing 3 giant, kind of histories. They were introduced in the 60s.
Yes, right.
When it came back in the 90s with Jim Valentino.
Yeah.
And then their modern 2006 run where kind of the collection of the team is close.
Advent Landing.
Yes, exactly. Thank you. How tough? I mean, that's so much balancing. To try to figure out what story you're going to pick.
Well, I mean, obviously the Guardians it's the Advent Landing version, which is the primary version that I took most of the inspiration from. But I don't, listen, I mean, it's I have great respect for the comic books and the storylines, but also we're telling a movie in 2 hours worth of time, and all the intricacies sometimes can make a movie bad. So you have to simplify things in certain ways. And also for me, the way into Guardians was through Rocket. They pitched to me, Guardians of the Galaxy. I'm like, You know, I saw the original art and stuff like that, and it looked like Bugs Bunny with the Avengers. I liked the Guardians of the Galaxy and the Advent landing one, but it seemed like it was going to be goofy. They asked, you know, if I was interested, and I said, I'll think about it, and I smiled and I nodded my head, but I really thought that I was just going to go home and say no. And as I was driving home, all of a sudden, I thought I saw what the movie could be in my head. And I realized I loved Star Wars as a little kid. And I remember, even before Star Wars came out, like seeing those characters like on People magazine, seeing C-3PO in the, you know, grocery store and all this stuff. And I thought this, you know, could be a magical film that could bring color back to film. And that could be something that wasn't like Star Wars, but was something that could make people feel like Star Wars made me feel when I was a kid. And for Rocket, I saw the thing was how does a talking raccoon exist? And when I started to really ask that question, it seemed like the answer was very sad, because he's a genetically manipulated, he's a little innocent animal that was taken and performed upon in horrible experiments, and nobody cared about him, and he was turned from this innocent little animal, which is what he's meant to be, into something completely different. And he is completely and utterly alone. And to me, that's the center of Guardians of the Galaxy, is that base and that realness of who Rocket is and what he is looking for in life. And in many ways, he is the central character because of that. Although it seems like it's Peter Quill's story or Gamora's story, it really is, to me, mostly, you know, Rocket. And it's the one I relate to. And so that's, anyway, I don't know if that answers your question. But that's some information.
That I was going to ask if loud.
Well, we've got time for one more question, I think.
You actually just started to answer my own later, but when doing a story or a treatment, a lot of times, you know, writers will put themselves in the shoes of the character or relate to one more. I was going to say, is that the case for you? And if so, which one? It sounds probably like Rocket, but if
Rocket and Nebula, definitely. Yeah. Rocket and Nebula are the two, which I seem like a very nice guy, but I think I'm probably more like Rocket or Nebula. If you ask my producer Simon back there what I'm like on a day-to-day level, I'm probably more like Rocket or Nebula. But Rocket and Nebula are the two I relate to. In terms of who do I relate to the most, those are the two I see the world through. Peter Quill is a little bit who I would want to be in certain ways. Groot is based on my dog, 100%.
Very much like George Lucas.
He is, yes, right. Yeah, Groot is my dog on Spears. You know, and then I don't know where Drax comes from. He is himself. Same with Mantis. These magical characters that just sort of appear that I love. I love them all. I really have a deep, deep love for all those characters. But I see myself as Rocket and Nebula.
I do think we have time for one more question.
Well, I've had the great fortune of having your brother Sean as a guest at my show for 2 years.
I'm so sorry.
He just texted me to ask you something right here.
Okay. Oh, no.
He runs my poker tournament. We do it at a casino.
Yeah.
I'd be happy to know he got knocked out in the first round.
I will be happy to know.
Well, I asked him if you were a better poker player than him, and he said, ha, he is not.
Yeah, well. That's true. I'm definitely not as good a poker.
He graduated that high math degree at 14. I had to hear about it.
He did, that's right.
No, this is 7.
Yeah.
He said the best scene for me in that Guardians 2 was when he does the salute at the end.
Yeah.
Thanos too. I had no idea until he told me a couple weeks ago that's a salute to Christopher Lloyd and One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Now,
exactly
it
right.
ruins it for me because I thought it was great for that, but every time I watch it, I just think of
Well, thanks for ruining it for everyone else.
But was that something that he came up with, or you came up with?
I came up with it. I said it in the treatment. Yeah, it is, you know. Listen, there's that moment at the end of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. I don't know how many of you have seen that movie. But there's a moment at the end where, you know, the main character dies, and the character of Chief finds the strength and throws this thing through the window, the sink through the window that, you know, the guy who died never could, and he shows this great amount of spirit, and the guy's spirit lives on in Chief as he runs off into freedom by himself, and the other inmates see him going in there. They, you know, see the magic in that. And that's really the feeling that I wanted to create at the end of Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 with what occurred in that film. And so that moment of Christopher Lloyd is really what Sean was inspired by and what I showed him before we shot the scene. I love it, yeah, I love it. He's an amazing actor. My brother Sean is a jerk. Yeah, but he's an amazing actor. He's a really talented actor.
Well, James, thank you so much for being here today with us. We really appreciate you coming here from Marvel, from Hasbro, from HasCon. Ladies and gentlemen, give a giant hand to James.